Welcome to Tales from the Fandom, a podcast that brings a special guest out of the multiverse and straight to you. And now your host, David Ginsburg.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of Tales from the Fandom. We are into November, and it's hard to believe that we've only got 2 months to go before the next year is here. It's crazy. We have a great episode coming up with Stephen Pappas. He is one of the co-hosts of the Is This Adulting podcast, as well as the co-host of the Meddling Kids Podcast, which is a Scooby-Doo review podcast, and it's a wonderful podcast to listen to. Just a quick note, I did start a Facebook fan group called The Fandom of Tales from the Fandom. I would love if you came and joined in on the discussions that we have. Generally, at least one item is posted daily just to discuss whether it's something that a guest is talking about or something that is fun that just pops up on the internet. But I would love to have you there. So definitely come and check out the Fandom of Tales from the Fandom. It's a group on Facebook, and you can find the links in our show notes or on our Facebook page, Tales from the Fandom. So definitely come and check it out. And be sure to listen to these two promos. They're both for the podcast that Stephen does, Is This Adulting, and the Meddling Kids. So take a listen, and then listen to Stephen and I talk about a bunch of different fandoms, and really just, it's a great discussion. And I loved getting to listen to it again, and I hope you enjoy it. Have a great day.
Hey everybody, this is your best friend Steven.
And this is your best friend Chris.
And we're the hosts of the podcast, Is This Adulting?
Every week, we sit down to talk about life, debate pointless topics, and most importantly, break the stigma on mental illness through opening up about our own struggles and how it affects us every day. Oh, and do you like games? We got those too.
What about guests from all your favorite podcasts?
Ooh, like Justin from Generation Y, or Nina from Already Gone, or Hal Lublin from Everything. And of course, you can't forget our special guest, Tom Bodette from those Motel 6 commercials. Okay, that last one might have been a stretch.
Yeah, just like them. So, join us each Thursday as we attempt to navigate adulthood as overgrown man-children. And remember, kids, be happy, stay healthy, and go hug someone.
Because you never know. They might just be the host of your new favorite podcast.
Hey everybody, I'm Stephen Pappas.
And I'm Julie Ken.
And we are the host of the Meddling Kids Podcast, a review of all things Scooby-Doo.
We are going through every episode in the Scooby-Doo canon to explain all the questions you meddling kids have.
Right, exactly. Like, is Fred a serial killer? How old is Fred exactly?
Why does Daphne have such bad posture?
Where do these kids live, and is pot legal there?
Where is this place? I think it's Florida. Anyway, stick with us for the Meddling Kids Podcast, a groovy review of all things Scooby-Doo.
And welcome to another episode of Tales from the Fandom. I am joined by someone whose podcast I discovered on the Facebook group Podcast We Listen To, and subsequently he has a new podcast that's come out, which is right up my wheelhouse. If anybody knows that I love Scooby-Doo, his podcast is a tremendous addition to the world of Scooby-Doo, and he's got some great and interesting theories on several of the characters. And I'm joined by Stephen Pappas, who also does Is This Adulting podcast. Welcome to the show, Stephen.
Thanks so much for having me. And I would argue that they're not theories; they are stone cold facts on Scooby-Doo. That is exactly what I would argue.
Well, we'll get to that shortly, but I know when I found your podcast, we'd started talking about some stuff, you had mentioned that there's a lot of different things that you are into, and one of the most one of the major items or fandoms that you're into is the world of comic books.
It is indeed. Have been since I was, I guess, about 12 years old.
What were some of your favorite comics growing up as a kid?
I can tell you without a doubt, my favorite comic was a little-known comic that I feel like most people probably don't remember. They tried to make a resurgence with it in the early to mid-2000s, and it didn't work. And that was a comic book series called What If by Marvel. It was essentially Elseworlds Tales. It would go through and it would say, you know, what about or what if Spider-Man had kept the black suit? What if Spider-Man had kept his cosmic powers? What if, can you tell I'm talking a lot about Spider-Man? What if Spider-Man had joined the Fantastic Four? And so it broke down a lot of those stories. What if Hulk killed the Wolverine was issue 50? What if Wolverine killed Hulk was another one? Like, it would just go through and break down these stories that the Watcher, who is a character in the Marvel Universe, would kind of say, I have seen all realities, and let me tell you this story from this alternate reality. And so I had every issue from the 1980s series, the 1990s series, which was my favorite, and then the kind of crappy early 2000s series as well.
Yeah, that was a great comic series. Those were always those fun comics where it's like, what if Punisher kills everybody?
Right.
And it's like, well, I don't have to read it in like 10 or 20 issues because that would mess everything up in the actual universe. Let's read and find out what happens. Just what if? And that was always one of those fun comics to pick up because I don't know if it's a regular series where it'd come out each month, but
at one point
it's definitely fun. Okay.
Because I know for me, actually, I found them, I guess it was around 2002, a comic book store opened about a mile up the road from where I lived growing up. And I was probably 12 years old, 11 or 12. And, back then we didn't think twice about hopping on my bike and riding a mile down a busy road when I was 12. And so I would throw my backpack on and I would take my $10 allowance that I got for mowing the lawn and doing chores and whatever. And I would ride up to the comic book store, and the guy ended up knowing me. They actually called me What If. That was just his little nickname for me. And I would throw on my backpack, ride up there, go to the store. He wouldn't charge me tax, and I would go sit on the floor and dig through quarter bins for hours looking for issues of What If, looking for issues of Nightwing, looking for issues of other series that I loved. And I would get 40 issues a week. I would go up to the counter. He wouldn't charge me tax. And I would give him my $10, get my 40 issues, stick them in my backpack, and ride home. And over that week, I would read those 40 issues, sometimes in the first couple days. And then I would do it all over again the next week. And I did that every week until I was probably 16 and thought I was too cool for comics for a couple years.
Woo.
But yeah, I know I was hot stuff. And so, yeah, I did it for a long time and I loved it. And I ended up getting a complete run and I sought out those issues that I really wanted because the very first comic book I ever read was What If, Volume 2, Issue 4. What if Spider-Man had kept the alien suit? And that did something to me. I hated reading growing up. I was not a reader. Even, my mom handed me the first Harry Potter book when it first came out and I was like, meh. Like, I'm not interested in this. Years later, I would go on to read them, and if I hadn't, my wife would probably have never married me. But because she's obsessed. But I found my ability to read comic books was a lot stronger than my ability to read novels, and I think that probably has to do with my ADHD. But I loved just being able to sit down and have the pictures and have the images to go along with the words and the art. I learned the artists' names. I learned the authors that I liked. And yeah, so that one issue sparked everything. And eventually, once we get to that part of the sad story of my comic collecting, eventually when I had to sell my collection, I kept one issue and it was What If Volume 2, number 4. And it is framed in my back office. It is worth a grand total of about $2.85. It is I think it's worth only about $1 more than the cover price. It's worthless. It's probably falling apart, but I've got it framed because that was my first comic book. And that started something for me that became to this point, basically a lifelong obsession.
That's awesome. And I know, the same happened with me as far as comics go. I remember picking up like the first comics I ever read were like the Archie comics, because that was back when I was, I don't know, 9 or 10, somewhere around there. Right. But I remember going to like this really rundown gas station that used to have comic books in Florida, And I remember picking up a few just based on like their covers. Like I remember picking up Silver Surfer. I remember picking up just whatever was randomly out. But then I'd also get those weird collections that they would sell in that like plasticky, like, oh, buy like these 5 comic books for like $5 type thing.
Yep.
And the first one that I remember that really made an impact on me was Fantastic Four, where the Fantastic Four were, and I use air quotes since people can't see this, air quotes, Fantastic Four were killed, and the new Fantastic Four were brought together, and it was Ghost Rider, Spider-Man, Wolverine, and Grey Hulk were the new Fantastic Four for like all of 2 issues. That was it. And
Interesting.
is such a great, like, oh, look at these guys having to, work together. Like, there's Wolverine and there's Grey Hulk and Ghost Rider and Spider-Man, and they're going to be the new Fantastic Four. And then eventually I found, like, that next issue is like, oh, they lasted, like, one issue, and it was just a big scheme by Reed Richards? Okay.
Yeah, because comic books.
Because comic books, absolutely, because comic books. But then I started collecting probably right around high school. So like New Warriors was one of those big ones that I collected.
Okay.
X-Men, and then in college when the Ultimate run of Marvel Comics started, that was like my big thing was, yay, I don't have to understand like 50 years of history. I can start all over with these new characters and new twists, and then it got as convoluted as it did previously.
Right. Well, all the universes get convoluted. It's a lot of people don't like what DC has done over the last 5 or 10 years, and I can understand that on some levels, but I think it also brought about some of the best arcs that we've seen in a long time. A lot of people disagree with me on that, but come at me, Okay, well, don't come at me. I'm very easily influenced. I don't know. I grew up reading mostly Marvel, and it was the What Ifs, it was Spider-Man, it was things like that. And then when I got older, I kind of shifted more toward DC. And really, I mean, hands down, favorite character in comic books ever is Dick Grayson. Ever. Dick Grayson as Robin, Dick Grayson as Nightwing, especially Dick Grayson as Grayson in the New 52, when he could no longer be Nightwing. Dick Grayson as Nightwing now. I love that character. I think he is so interesting and so compelling compared to a lot of the different characters that you see in comic books that seem a little cookie cutter, a little by the book,
Now, what was it? Why? I've almost always read Marvel comics with very few exceptions. I'm not a big DC person. So what was the draw for you from going from Marvel to like the DC side of things?
Right. Well, I never abandoned my Marvel roots. I still will read some Marvel books. Thank God for Marvel Unlimited app. I don't know if you have used that. I don't know if any of you out there have used it. I am not endorsing it like officially for money or anything, but $10 a month and you have access to, 40,000 issues of comics. You can read Amazing Spider-Man #1 from 1963, or you can read, I think it runs about 6 months behind what the current comics are. So you can read up to 6 months. And if you really think about it, once you're kind of caught up, you're working on a schedule where you're getting one every week. You're just 6 months behind.
Right.
But so I've never betrayed my Marvel roots fully, but I think as I got older, I saw DC as being a little more adult at the time and a little more edgy. DC had Vertigo comics, and they had things like Hellblazer and Swamp Thing, and they published things that I went on to read like Watchmen and V for Vendetta and things like that. And so I think I saw that, especially once I got older and thought about comic books as, I'm too cool for comic books, but these DC comics are pretty cool. Like I thought that was where I needed to be reading. So I secretly still read my Spider-Man, which was as crazy and dumb and silly as it has ever been. but I flocked a little more toward DC, specifically the Bat family, because I grew up obsessed with Batman before comic books kind of got a hold on me. Batman did, because of the Bruce Timm, Paul Dini, Batman the Animated Series. I had every toy growing up. I was an only child, so I guess I was a little spoiled. I had every toy growing up. I had the Batmobile, the Batcave, which was one of my favorite toys, and I actually tracked down at a Comic-Con, and some guy was like, oh, I don't know, $10? And I was like, yeah, most people sell that for $100, so yes, I will take it. And it's sitting on my shelf right now because it's just a piece of my childhood. I had been obsessed with Batman. I had learned Robin and Nightwing and sort of those terms from the early animated series. But as I went on to read the books, I saw something that was darker and at the time felt more grounded in reality, and I got behind that.
Okay. And why Nightwing, Dick Grayson specifically? Just because, you know, people that I talk to about DC Comics, they're very, you know, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Green Arrow, Green Lantern. Not so much Aquaman, I think, due to like the Super Friends stuff, but his the later run I've heard is very good. Yeah, you know, even like Teen Titans overall as like the group, or Justice League, but specifically Nightwing or Dick Grayson, however you want to, go with. Why him?
Well, Nightwing is interesting to me because when you take a step back and look, okay, Dick Grayson, everybody knows, Detective Comics number 38 back in the 40s, he was the original Robin. And so you got to see him as Robin until the mid-80s, and he was always there. He was second fiddle to Batman, but he also, as the comics went on, he was less of the Burt Ward, like, holy swordfish, Batman! Like, he was less of that, and, like, he was more of a character that would stand up to Batman, and that would say, I don't agree with you. I think that you're going about this wrong, but Batman's so bullheaded in so many situations that, you know, Lego Batman just came out, and it's a joke. But at the same time, like, some of that, like, bullheadedness that you see in that movie is in the comics. It's greatly exaggerated in the Lego Batman movie, but it's in the comics. Batman thinks he's never wrong, and it's hard for him to admit that he's wrong. And so I always respected the fact that Robin stood up to him, and when he got older, he decided it was time to step out of Batman's shadow and to be his own hero. And, you know, as a teenager, like, the thought of stepping out of the shadow of your parents or whoever you've kind of followed the whole time and becoming your own person was something that really resonated with me. And so when he stepped out and became Nightwing, and I started reading that Chuck Dixon run of Nightwing, I loved it. And then, you know, he's Nightwing, and he goes on as Nightwing, and then all of a sudden Grant Morrison gets control of the comics, and Batman dies, in air quotes, and he's actually traveling through time. But you get the Battle for the Cowl series, and all of a sudden it's who's going to be Batman, who's going to be the next Batman, and finally, who becomes the next Batman? Dick Grayson. He takes on the mantle of Batman, and he's Batman for, I want to say, about a year in the comics. The entire Batman and Robin run, where Dick Grayson Batman and Damian Wayne Robin, is fantastic. A lot of people don't like it because it's super weird because it's Grant Morrison and he does a lot of drugs, but I enjoyed it because I got to see my favorite character be Batman. He got to be who he had always kind of aspired to be, but be his version of it. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden, he's back to Nightwing when Bruce comes back, and then you get the New 52, and all this happens. And I actually think that the Nightwing run in New 52 by Kyle Higgins was good. A lot of people don't agree with that, but I think it was solid. It's no Chuck Dixon from the 90s, but it's about as good as you were going to get at the time. And then all of a sudden, they did this big event that was garbage, and he could no longer be Nightwing because his identity was revealed to the world.
Dun, dun, dun.
Exactly. And so at least they didn't kill him. And so, I mean, he would have been back in a year. But so he had to go on and be Grayson. He was an agent working for Spiral, which is kind of like the Oh, in the Marvel Universe. The
Like
opposite of
S.H.I.E.L.D.?
Hydra. S.H.I.E.L.D. There you go.
Okay.
I feel stupid for not knowing S.H.I.E.L.D. as much as I talk about Marvel. Dick Grayson, to me, represented the ability to adapt and the ability to change. And as I got older and I dealt with life things, everything from college and the experiences you faced there to open heart surgery and ultimately the death of my father, seeing a character that could adapt to change and that stayed true to himself and his values no matter what was something that really stuck with me. And so Dick Grayson, to me, he's my favorite character. I can't always explain the exact reasons. That's the overview of it, but there's just something about him that I was drawn to initially, and maybe it is that he was Robin, but I'm not sure.
The only experience I have with Nightwing beyond, or Dick Grayson, beyond like Batman the Animated Series and whatever, I really like DC's direct-to-video home movies, like the animated stuff. They're so good. And so, like, that's the exposure I get from them. And then on occasion, like, I'd catch or pick up, like, Teen Titans whenever he was involved, or Starfire had a recent run of her own series, and he showed up. And because I love Starfire, like, she's one of my favorite DC characters. It's like, okay, I know that they were together for a while. I don't know if they're together now, but it's just such an interesting pairing that it made me like it. It generally makes me want to go back and read when they were together just to see why, like, what he was all about and his character and everything.
Right. And he's a very compelling character, as is Starfire. I do like Starfire a lot. She was in a series not too long ago with Jason Todd, Red Hood, who's now Red Hood. He was the second Robin, died in the 80s, spoiler alert. And he went on to be Red Hood, and which was kind of an anti-hero for a while. And she was in a series with him at the New 52, the beginning of it, called Red Hood and the Outsiders. Again, critically, that series was panned, but I found myself enjoying issues of that and certain arcs of it specifically. Now, there is a lot of garbage in there you have to wade through, but I wasn't super familiar with Starfire outside of her relationship with Nightwing, so it gave me kind of a new take on her, which I thought was really cool.
If somebody wanted to get into Nightwing, where should they start? I know that's probably a tough question because he's been around for such a long time.
Right, he has. Well, but not really in the scheme of comics. He's only been around for about, I guess, 20-ish years, 25 years roughly. But that's a while. There's a lot of material to read. I would suggest right now they are recollecting the original 1990s Chuck Dixon run where the character was created. I mean, because the character technically was created a long time ago and in the 80s, and it was kind of crappy and nobody really liked him and it was kind of boring. And then in the 90s, Chuck Dixon had a run that was 150 issues on Nightwing, and it was incredible. It revitalized the character. It made him the character that I love. And so they're recollecting it right now. In fact, my volume 6 that just came out yesterday arrived in the mail yesterday on release day. Thanks, Amazon. And I was really excited. So I would start with those collected versions right now that they're running. They've been doing them for about 3 years, and they're up to issue 53, so they're about a third of the way through the run, but volumes 1 through 6 are out right now. And I think the first volume is called Welcome to Bloodhaven, but I would definitely say start with the Chuck Dixon stuff. The New 52 stuff, you have to have a little more background on Nightwing to really understand what's going on. And without Chuck Dixon, the current stuff that they're doing after Rebirth really won't make a lot of sense either without the history of the character. And so even though the 52 stuff can be picked up kind of on its own, I think that it really, if you want a basis of who that character is, you start with volume 1 of the new collection of Chuck Dixon's stuff.
Okay, awesome. That'll be something I'll have to take a look into. Does he have a lot of overlap as far as with like particular characters beyond like the normal Bat family, or does he just set up his own city and has his own rogues and his own like maybe new characters that are developed as support?
Yes and no, both. He kind of bounces back and forth between helping the Bat family and doing things, but he goes to Bloodhaven to make his own way. He goes to Bloodhaven to set up his own city. He does end up with his own set of rogues. He does end up with his own allies in the city, but he does also go back a lot to Gotham to help Batman with different things. So usually there is some crossover. I remember the first Nightwing issue I read was number 17. I got it out of a quarter bin, and it was him versus Man-Bat, which is a Batman villain. And so there is some crossover throughout it, but one of the things I do like is he is kind of set up on his own, and he's within a distance that he can go aid if he needs to, but probably 7 out of 10 issues or 6 out of 10 issues, he's kind of on his own, not having too much crossover. And really, he doesn't have much crossover outside of the Bat family, Starfire occasionally, some things with the Teen Titans. But aside from that, there's not too much crossover, which when you're kind of getting to know a character, I kind of like, because it gives you more time to know that character.
Absolutely. Instead of having to know, like, oh, who's this person? And now I have to read up on who this person is and what they're doing and everything else.
Right. And when the New 52 series, there's a lot more crossover with the Bat series, because their New 52 was basically anchored with their Batman series by Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo. And that honestly is one of the best runs on Batman I think I've ever read. If you haven't read it, The Court of the Owls, where they start out, they created the first new Batman villain in probably 20 years that was compelling enough that I wanted them to come back. Like, usually they're one-offs and you're like, all right, new Batman villain, gross. Like, Harley Quinn and then The Court of the Owls are probably the two most recent characters created that really are going to have an impact on the Batman universe for a long time. And so right. I know that you said you like the animated ones. They did Court of the Owls in one of the animated films. I can't remember which one. I think it might be Batman versus Robin or Batman and Son. And they didn't really do it justice.
Yeah, I haven't seen that one yet, because I've heard of the Court of the Owls as far as like in the comic series, but I have not seen the animated one yet. But
if you like, Scott Snyder is very wordy. He lets the words tell the story just as much as Greg Capullo's art does, which I think that balance is good. But he is very wordy, and so I would say if that doesn't bother you, check out the first 2 volumes of the New 52 Batman series as well. Nightwing has some crossover there, but it is, I think the first 2 volumes are called The Court of the Owls is Volume 1 and City of Owls is Volume 2. And it is one of the best Batman stories I have read probably ever. It's about a 12-issue arc, and it's fantastic. But it's definitely worth your time.
Awesome. I'm going to have to check it out, because that's one of the things that I've wanted to get into since starting this podcast, is people bring up, DC a lot. And generally it's, Batman, the animated series, or the Wonder Woman movie, DC, the movie universe and stuff. And I've talked with a few people about comics, and it's like, I never know where to start. And I'm not, based on my personal preference, like, I don't like Superman.
Me neither.
I don't like him as a character in the movies, TV show, like nothing. But I like the DC, like CW TV shows like Arrow and Flash. And so like that I'm good with. And I just would like to kind of get in somewhere ground level to start with. And it's nice to like get people to tell me like, oh, try this trade or try, this run of stuff. And that way I can find it and maybe consume it soon.
Well, I'll just before we move on, I'll throw out one more run for you. Jeff Lemire and Andrea Sorrentino had a run on Green Arrow in the New 52. The first few volumes of New 52 Green Arrow were utter garbage, and it was real bad. It was real bad. Some of the worst comics I've read in years. And then Jeff Lemire came on, and he brought Andrea Sorrentino with him as the artist, and the art is an acquired taste for a lot of people. I enjoy Sorrentino's art, but Lemire's storytelling is a lot closer to the show, but with more, no offense to the CW show, because I do enjoy Arrow a lot. It has more depth in the characters, and I really enjoyed their run. They went on I want to say about a 30-issue run. And it's collected in an omnibus. It's also collected, it's the 3rd trade through, I think, the 6th or 7th trade. And if you like Green Arrow, that is probably the best Green Arrow run I've ever read. Outside of, I really like the dorky, like old school Green Arrow that looks like Robin Hood. I really like Kevin Smith's run in the early 2000s where he did a 15-issue run with Green Arrow with the, the Robin Hood hat and the Van Dyke beard and all that. But as far as a modernized Arrow goes, Lemire's run on Green Arrow from the New 52 was phenomenal.
I will definitely have to take a look for those because I enjoy getting to, get invested in new characters and find out more about these characters that all obviously there's a whole section of people and it's like, I'd like to know more about them.
Right. No, I don't blame you. Also, have you heard... If you like the animated movies, they're releasing a 40-movie box set of all of the DC animated movies for like $60.
I did not know that, but that's a great price.
Yeah, they're releasing all of them. I think at the end of September. I heard $60. They may up it now that people have been like, "Oh, that's so great." They may up it a little more, but it's coming. I think late September, early October, and I'm really excited about it because I'm gonna go back and see some of the ones I missed. Because, I mean, I'll be honest, I do skip over anything that's like Superman. I'm like, well, I'm okay. Like, I'll watch my Batman movies. Like, I'll do that. And I did miss The Killing Joke, which I feel like is the cardinal sin of the animated universe. But I heard mixed reviews, so I wasn't quite ready to commit to it because I love the book so much. But I know that those animated films, if you have watched The Dark Knight Returns, the 2 films that they did that in, it was gritty. It was everything Frank Miller wanted it to be, and God, was it good.
I'm not sure if I watched those. I did. I know that I watched the latest one is like Justice League Dark with Batman and Zatanna and John Constantine and Swamp Thing. Is like, that's pretty cool. I like that one.
Yeah, I've heard that one's really good. That's another one I've missed. I saw a run of them for about 2 years where I bought every one and watched, Batman and Robin Bad Blood and Batman versus Robin and Batman and Son and all of those when they were kind of doing the Damian Wayne arc in the movies. But I did miss out on a lot of the newer ones that I've really wanted to go back and watch. I know they're releasing Batman and Harley Quinn soon, and I think it was actually written and designed by Bruce Timm and Paul Dini.
Yeah, that one is, because I saw the previews for that. I was like, oh, that seems interesting.
Yeah, I love Bruce Timm, like that whole universe. Even, I'll say it, and I can hear the shock in your voice already, even the Superman series that Bruce Timm and Paul Dini did, the Superman animated series, is the only time I've ever really been like, yeah, Superman, cool. And Justice League, I guess. But really in Justice League, he was more just there because he had to be.
Right. Going away from the comic side of things, one of the topics I've only talked to probably one other person doing this podcast has been about a thing that happens in New York, but also all over, and that is Broadway shows.
Yeah.
And I'm not overly versed in Broadway. I mean, I've seen Phantom of the Opera twice. I saw Wicked for the first time this year when it came through, and I've seen maybe something. Oh, Avenue Q, and that's pretty much my Broadway experience.
I am a equal opportunity nerd, is what I've always told people. So, I've got the comic book and the movie and the video game and the Star Wars and all that side of me, but then I have this whole other musical theater nerd side of me that is dedicated to all the shows, and not your huge shows necessarily, but like all sorts of little shows. I did theater in high school, and so that kind of got me into it a little bit, but I've actually not seen a lot of them as much as I've read the scripts and listened to the music because, I'll be honest, real poor over here. And so when they come through, tickets are through the ceiling, especially the big shows. And so I have not actually been able to go to too many. The one I did go to, I took my wife for Christmas 3 or 4 years ago, actually before we were married, we were engaged. We went and saw Les Mis when it came through on tour. And that was phenomenal. But yes, I am very much into Broadway.
How did you start with Broadway? Was it something in school before then? I remember like my first experience was we were doing a class trip. I lived in Ontario at the time in Canada, and we were going from our very small city to Toronto to watch Phantom of the Opera. And so like a week before, they're like, okay, let's listen to the music and we're going to talk about the show and the characters, and that was my first experience. And it's like, okay. And I mean, there's shows that I'd love to go see, but overall it's not like high on my list, especially with the price tag of shows when they do come. It's like, oh, you want $80 to $100 for one ticket,
right? Yeah, it's insane. And if you're going to see Hamilton, it's a lot more. But I guess the easiest way to say it is growing up when I grew up, which was, I'm a 90s kid.
Okay.
And so I'm 27 years old. I guess I fall right into that millennial category that everybody seems to hate so much. But I grew up with what is called, quote unquote, the Disney Renaissance.
Yes.
And so I grew up I was born the year Little Mermaid came out, and I grew up between Little Mermaid and really Tarzan was probably the last of the Disney Renaissance. So between 89 and 99.
Right.
And so I grew up with, if you think about the movies that came out during that time, Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, which I will be completely honest on here, hot take, Beauty and the Beast is my favorite movie ever. Not just favorite Disney movie, not favorite animated movie. It's my favorite movie, is the 1991 Beauty and the Beast. And so Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, Lion King, Pocahontas, Hunchback of Notre Dame, Mulan, Hercules, Tarzan. I mean, all of these movies were musicals, which was true of the Disney movies before, but they were musicals in a different way. These were musicals in almost a Broadway sense. The style of music was more what you would expect from musical theater and less just numbers that were thrown into the movie. And so for me, that's where my love of music blended with story kind of came in. And I remember actually in the 7th grade, I believe, going to a show in Greensboro, North Carolina at War Memorial Auditorium, nowhere fancy, and sitting there, and it was for a history class, and watching a play, an hour and a half, about Harriet Tubman. And it's not some award-winning play. It's not anything crazy, but it was the thing that resonated with me of like, oh, I really enjoy live theater. And so I found myself just drawn to it. And so once you mix in growing up in the Disney era with my love of theater, it kind of fell into place. And there were shows that I immediately gravitated toward. And ever since then, I've been the kid that watches as much as I can on YouTube of them performing live on talk shows. And I get all the soundtracks and I listen and I read the scripts, and I really find that stuff super interesting.
What are some of your favorite Broadway shows? Either ones that you've seen or ones that you've, listened to and read? And
that's hard. I would say a lot of people will go to these answers, but I think that speaks to the quality of the show and not to just some bandwagon fan type of idea.
Right.
Rent is great. I love Rent. Rent actually shaped and formed a lot of my social views and kind of, growing up in the South and a very conservative ideals. Rent kind of took me to a place where I was a more accepting and loving person. Mm-hmm. So Rent to me is very special. And then, there's shows I really enjoy. There's Wicked. I do think Wicked is a great show. I listened to a lot of Wicked in high school. But my favorite 3 shows have actually come out in the last 8 years. And 2 of them have come out in the last 2 years. So what was my favorite show for 2009 until 2015 was a show called Next to Normal. And as you mentioned at the top of the show, I host a show called Is This Adulting? And that show revolves a lot around comedy, but it also revolves around mental illness and my co-host and I coping with our mental illnesses. And so for me, Next to Normal is a show that really hits home because it is a show about a woman dealing with mental illness. And it's a musical. It's a dark comedy. It's very funny at parts, but it's also very dark at parts. And it deals with suicide and issues like that, but it also has you laughing your way out of your seat with some of the clever lines they put in. And so that really changed the way I looked at theater again, once I was older, of sitting there and looking and going, oh my gosh, like, they've done something very special here. Something very, very special. And so that was my favorite for a long time. And then, yes, everybody's going to know this is coming if they know anything about Broadway in the last few years. Hamilton. Man, I got to tell you, Hamilton's just so good. It's just so good. I truly believe that Hamilton is one of the most important pieces of art of my generation, of the past, I don't know, of the 21st century so far, for sure. I just think it's a crucial piece of art. And I actually did an entire bonus pod for our Patreon where my co-host and I were like, let's sit down and talk about Hamilton. And so he's not very familiar. And so he asked me, so what do you like about it? And he did not speak for 27 minutes while I waxed poetic on how Hamilton is one of the most important pieces of art in modern history and all of this stuff. And I went off and I talked about how brilliant this was and brilliant this was. And, about 30 minutes into the podcast, he just kind of went, well, there's not much more to say. I do want to let you know that we did start this conversation with me going, so why do you like it? He said, and that's all I asked. And then he just went off for 30 minutes about how good this show is, and we'll end it there. And I was like, okay, well, sorry. I just kind of got a little off track because I just think it's so powerful. I think it's brilliant. I think I enjoy hip hop. So to me, I think it's really interesting the way they used hip hop as the vernacular of music now, quote unquote, to tell the story of America then. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's genius. I think the script is brilliant. I think Lin-Manuel Miranda is a musical just monster, but in the best way. And everybody in that original cast is so talented. I just really enjoyed it. And then there's the third show, which is called Dear Evan Hansen. And this show...
I've heard of that one. I mean,
yes.
I've heard of Hamilton too, but
I don't think anyone has not heard of Hamilton at this point, unless they've been living under a rock, because it's so pervasive in the culture. But Dear Evan Hansen came out this year, and it actually just won 9 Tonys, including Best Performance by an Actor, Best Music, Best Show this year. And Dear Evan Hansen revolves around the story of a young boy who has social anxiety issues and is bullied, and one of the kids that is bullying him is also bullied. And within the first 10 or 15 minutes of the show, that bully character commits suicide. And so through a misunderstanding, Evan Hansen, the main character, finds himself in this lie where he has told the family and friends of this kid that they were actually best friends. And there's a reason for it. It's not just him trying to do that, but he's finally getting attention. He's finally being seen by people. And so for him, that's all he's ever wanted. And so it's about him trying to come to terms and basically live this lie that he was friends with this kid that tormented him, and, falling in love with his sister, and all of this stuff kind of revolving around mental health issues, again, which is important to me. And the music is fantastic. The lyrics get mental anxiety disorders and things like that. The lyrics get them so right. And it's just an incredibly powerful piece of theater. I will not spoil the ending because there are some twists that kind of come around. And it's not like he was alive the whole time. No, it's nothing like that. I mean, it's, but it's some of the character development stuff, some of the things you find out about the history of some of the characters that make it very powerful. But that one is actually such a big deal within the mental health community right now, raising awareness, raising funds for suicide prevention, that actually within our Facebook discussion group for our podcast, one of our listeners PayPal'd me the money, and tattoos are not cheap, but she PayPal'd me the money to get one of the lines from the show that has become the tagline for people who have dealt with mental illness and suicide problems. It has kind of become a rallying cry, and she PayPal'd me the money to get it tattooed on my arm because our listeners are incredible. And she's really cool. And the tattoo artist found out a little more about my history with that when I went in, and actually threw in a semicolon tattoo on my wrist. If you're aware of the semicolon movement at all, it just represents people who have dealt with illness and suicide and who have chosen to continue on. And he threw that in for free when he heard it, and actually gave me a pat on the back on the way out the door and said, if you ever need to talk to somebody, just come in here and you can sit down and talk with me. I was like, whoa. Like, it was just that day I saw more generosity out of humanity than I think I've seen in my entire life. And it was really cool. But
that's awesome.
Yeah, sorry. I took it in a weird direction there.
Oh,
at the
no,
end,
it's
but...
okay. You know, and the one, I mean, one of my friends had told me about the music because I'm so far out of certain things that they had told me about Hamilton, which I have to say I've tried to listen to Hamilton, but I don't have like the actual soundtrack. So, and listening to it on Spotify on the app makes it not go in order.
Oh, no.
And it's like, I don't understand what's happening. So that one's been tough. And then with Dear Evan Hansen, she had mentioned it to me. And then recently in the news, I remember reading a story about people like sending tweets or emails and saying like, how come you don't come out the stage door to sign things or take pictures? And I think the main actor was like, I leave all of myself on the stage every night. I just can't do that. Like, I have to take time for me to like get myself back together just so I can do the show the next day.
Right. And sometimes 2 times a day. And that role, that character especially, but all of that show is so emotionally charged. There's a lot of funny moments, but it's heavy on a lot of levels. And it ends kind of light, and they don't leave you like thinking that the world is dark and terrible and everything's bad, like on the way out the door. But there is resolution, but I can't imagine how drained, especially Ben Platt, the main actor, has to be after every performance. So, I mean, people can be weird about that all they want, but I don't blame him for a second for taking time to himself, because something we argue on our podcast all the time is self-care is so important, and it's not selfish to take care of yourself.
Absolutely. I know, even for like, I'm a very much an introverted person. And even when like I have social situations that I have to go into, whether it's like my sister, or my wife's family, which is really big. Like, she always talks about her family before we got married. She's like, my family is like the family from My Big Fat Greek Wedding, except they're all from Caribbean islands. And it's like, okay. And it's a really big family. And sometimes it's like social situations. It's like, okay, after I get done, I need to take an hour or 2 hours and be like, okay, I just want to like sit at my computer and just not do anything, or let me get a book and read. And I know that I have other friends that they also like, mental health is a big I don't know whether to say issue or problem, or they deal with it, a challenge
aspect of their life.
And there are times where they disappear and they spend a couple months where there's like no communication, because it's just they're doing what they need to do for themselves. And then it's like, oh, you're back. How's everything? And just catch back up with them again, and just always trying to be like that supportive person for them too. But yeah, like, Broadway shows are not what I guess traditionally they used to be at this time. I mean, Avenue Q was so out there when I watched it. I was like, oh, hey, like, that's something. And I remember Rent being such a hot button issue or topic of conversation at times, especially when they made the movie and the movie came out.
Right.
And it's like, okay, it's now out there for even more people to hear and see and get to know it, and obviously, backlash and everything else from it.
Right. And Broadway pushes the limits on what theater and comedy and drama can be in a live setting all the time. And I think they're just doing it in a different way now. But now they're pushing the limits in a way of these are things that are taboo to talk about, because mental illness is taboo in a lot of ways in our society. And so this is their way of saying, let's talk about it. Like, let's be open about it. Let's be honest about it. And let's tell you a powerful story involving it. I mean, they've always kind of, like I said, push the limits. You've got everything from Rent, which was definitely pushing the limits at the time, to Book of Mormon, which Book of Mormon is written by, their names escape me, Trey Parker and Matt Stone.
Yeah,
who
from
do South Park.
Yeah.
And so it is a musical written by the guys from South Park. And it is exactly what you would imagine a musical written by the guys from South Park to be. And so a lot of people took a lot of offense to Book of Mormon. And then I feel like there have been other shows that have kind of pushed the limits. And, it's a cool thing, though. I kind of like that art is kind of pushing the limits in that way. Just like I think any medium tries to push the limits, not just whether it be Broadway or comic books. I mean, both of the things we've talked about, I think it's cool when they kind of test the waters and see what they can do. Because, for instance, jumping back really quickly, there is a graphic novel right now called March, and there are 3 volumes of it. And it was written by a senator whose name escapes me right now, but he was a large part of the civil rights movement in the 60s. And he wrote a graphic novel about being part of the civil rights movement in the 60s and had an artist draw it, and they're teaching it in schools. And so it's so powerful to see how those mediums can share messages that need to be shared. Or there's a very famous Eisner Award-winning comic called Mouse.
Yes.
That tells the history of the Holocaust through the perspective of the Jewish community and those tortured by the Nazis being mice and the Nazis being cats. And good Lord, did they tell a powerful story through this medium that everybody was like, oh, well, it's a comic book. It's a comic. That's cute. Like, then you read it and you're like, no, it's not cute. It's incredibly powerful. Nothing about Mouse is cute.
Right. And that the person that did March is John Lewis. He's the congressman that is the one that said that he was not going to attend Trump's inauguration. Right. And so I guess my last question on Broadway before we talk about your podcasts is, how do you discover Broadway shows to get into? Is it from word of mouth and then you like pick up, say, the soundtrack, or you research it? Like, what's your method of discovering them?
I'm a super nerd, and I like to look online and see what's been announced, what's coming up next season, what sounds interesting, and then I will go and listen to those shows and read those scripts if I'm not able to see it, and really kind of do it from that. Hamilton was completely word of mouth for me. Mm-hmm. All my friends, everybody, you got to listen to Hamilton. You got to listen to Hamilton. You got to listen to Hamilton. And I kind of didn't want to, just to be like different, just to be like, no, I'm not going to listen to Hamilton. I'm a hipster. I'm too cool. And then I listened to Hamilton and I was like, dang, they're all right. It's so good. But Dear Evan Hansen, I just discovered through, I read the synopsis. I was like, that sounds like something I want to listen to. And so I got the soundtrack, listened to it. And next thing I knew, 6 months later, it's winning all the Tony Awards. And there's shows every year that if I haven't listened to them, I try to check out what's nominated for Best New Musical. Because I think once the Tonys roll around, because I think that's a great way to kind of find, okay, well, this is what most people consider to be the best of the best for this year. And there was one this year that was incredible, but it wasn't to the level of Dear Evan Hansen. It was called Come From Away. And the music is really cool. The choreography is really cool. And it is a show about the small town in Canada. I've forgotten the name of the town, but it's the small town in Canada that on 9/11, when all the planes were grounded, they took in, literally their population was doubled that night by how many planes were grounded there. I think they had a population of 7,600 and they took in 7,200 passengers into this little town. And It's a very good show. It's very interesting. It's not as depressing as you probably think it would be, having to revolve around 9/11. It's hopeful, and the music is really interesting, and it's beautiful. And so like I saw, hey, this is something that is getting some buzz, so let me listen to it. Let me see how I like it. And so that's how I found a lot of shows. There's a show out there that I found that way called Something Rotten that is coming through Charlotte, and I'm so excited. And I told my wife, like, I will barrel over people to get to the box office to get tickets to this show. The music is a little more traditional in what you would think of as like show tunes, but it's making fun of them at the same time. And it tells the story of a writer who is writing in the time of Shakespeare. And Shakespeare is portrayed as this like rock star, like kind of jerk, like pain in the butt, like character. And then this little writer and his brother are just trying to do something. So he goes to a soothsayer and says like, well, how do I, look into the future? How can I beat Shakespeare? What's the next big thing? And so the guy tells him, you need to write a musical. He's like, what's a musical? And so he writes this really far-fetched musical, and it's a comedy that goes on about that. And it's just such a fun show. It's hilarious. And I definitely recommend that one too if you're looking for a good laugh. But yeah, I found it that way. So it's really just a matter of taking a look at what's out there and going, this sounds like something I'd be into. This sounds like something I would not be into, and picking and choosing. And I try to give everything a chance, but I don't always succeed with that.
Okay. And then finally, as has been brought up a few times, either from the opening or just talking, is that you do your main podcast, I guess, if I could call it your main podcast, is This Adulting?
Yes, that is. I would probably call that the main podcast.
And you and your co-host cover mental health.
Sort of. Yes.
Okay.
We're very interesting. we describe ourselves as a mental health comedy podcast, and everybody kind of cocks their head to the side and goes, what? And so the easiest way to describe it is we try to break the stigma on mental illness through a comedic lens. And so what we do is every week we get on there, we ask each other, how have you been this week? Like, what's up with your mental health? Like, and some weeks it's like, I've been great, I'm doing good. But some weeks it's like, I'm really depressed and I've had bad thoughts and like all this stuff. We try to be as open and honest as we can with our audience, because people don't realize that mental illness affects over 40 million Americans. And so this is something that, everybody knows somebody who deals with anxiety or depression or bipolar or schizophrenia or PTSD or agoraphobia, and the list goes on. I have about 4 of those. But, you don't talk about it because it's this hush hush, no, you don't talk about it thing. And so we decided what would happen if we just went out there and started talking about it openly. And so we talk about things like therapy and medication and things we're doing and panic attacks and all the stuff we're dealing with. We do that for about 15 or 20 minutes, depending on how much we need to talk about it. And then we talk about random topics, and we've covered everything from addiction to which breakfast cereal is the best, to the episode that is releasing when we're recording this. The episode that's releasing this week has to do with, which Nickelodeon game show from the 90s was the best. Like, we play games that are silly. Like, is this a real mascot or a made up mascot? We embrace our humor because we want to show people that, yeah, we are people who are living with mental illness, but that doesn't mean that we're quote unquote crazy. That doesn't mean we're quote unquote wackos. We're not insane. We're just people who struggle with an illness, the same as anybody who has diabetes, the same as anybody who has heart disease. Ours is just an illness that affects our brain and affects the chemicals in our brain. And so we try to just kind of be open and honest and share and say, hey, I'm going through this, but also, aren't Golden Grams just the best? And it's kind of that every week. And we've formed a discussion group called the Is This Adulting Best Friends? And it's 150 people strong, and it is literally, somebody can come in there and be like, today is a bad day because I feel like we've called our illness Karen on the show. We just gave our illness the name Karen, and our reasoning was everyone knows a Karen that's a little too Karen.
Yes.
But Hopefully, nobody in our group yet is named Karen. I will have to explain that to them if they come in because they'll be very confused why everybody's always like cursing out Karen in our group. But they're able to come in and say, Karen has been a real you-know-what this week, and I'm having trouble. And 40 people are immediately commenting saying, I'm here if you need to talk, text me, call me, whatever you need. Or a person can come in and go, did y'all see that new Star Wars trailer? Look at this, and drop the video. And like, it's just a place for people to literally be best friends. And if that means supporting each other, cool. If that means talking about how much you love yellow starburst versus pink starburst, then that's what it is. Like, it's just become a place for people to live life together. And it's a really cool thing to be a part of. And I'm extremely proud to have been a part of creating it. And it's a really fun thing to watch.
How did it come about as far as you just deciding to do it one day? Or was it just like a plan, or
the group or the podcast itself?
The podcast.
Oh, the podcast. Yeah. Well, what happened, not to get too heavy, cause I'm not going to bring down Tales from the Fandom, but what happened is December 31st of 2016, my father passed away suddenly, completely unexpected. Didn't know it was coming. Heart attack, boom, gone, 62 years old. And I had a mental breakdown, and I felt alone. I felt like, even though all these people were trying to support me, none of them understood. I felt like nobody really went through what I was going through. And then I started really realizing I can't be the only one that's feeling this. And so I went to my college roommate and I said, we're funny. We've always wanted to kind of start a podcast and we didn't know what to start. What if we did this? And it started out as just two friends sitting down and talking about how they suck at being adults. And that was the plan. And then it evolved into, let's be honest, let's be open, let's try to break the stigma on mental illness. Let's really talk about this stuff. And it just went from there, and it snowballed. And all of a sudden we started the group, and people within the podcast community have been so supportive of that. And I had somebody who, was ranking in the top 10 on iTunes at one point, and she told me, like, I'm excited to see y'all get there. And I'm like, okay. Like, we're not going to do that. She's like, but you have something here that no one else is doing. She said, because you're just being two goofy guys, which everyone's doing on the internet. Mm-hmm. She said, but you're doing it with heart, and you're doing it with a purpose, and you're doing it with a drive and a motivation and a reason. And that's something that a lot of people aren't doing. And so it evolved. And like I said, it just kind of snowballed into what it has kind of become. And we love it. We're happy with it. If we go a week without recording, we get all irritable with our wives because we're upset because we haven't gotten to sit down and have fun that week. We hate banking episodes because we just love doing it so much.
And your podcast, it looks like it started in April. So you've been doing it for, let's see here, higher math, May, June,
4.5
3 months. Okay.
Four. Wait, did I do math wrong? Oh my God. It's 3.5 months.
Yeah, 3.5 months.
Oh, I've been telling people 4.5 months. Oh, well, it's 3.5 months. I'm really bad at math.
Higher math right there. When do you release as far as episodes? Is it on a particular day or just whenever?
Every Thursday. Every single Thursday at midnight Eastern time is when the episodes drop. And so we have people, I wake up every morning and there's already people in the group talking about the episode because we have listeners in the UK that have been listening to it for hours and waiting for everyone to wake up so they can talk about whatever silly topic we talked about that week. And I wake up to 30 notifications, and I'm just like, some days I just want to roll over and just be like, I just need 5 more minutes before I have to turn my brain on. And then Friday morning I turn my brain on, and it is go, go, go for the rest of the day. But every Thursday.
And you have another podcast that just started. And as I mentioned in the opener, I was a huge Scooby-Doo fan. I mean, Universal Studios in Orlando, when they had the old Hanna-Barbera ride, like, that's what I love that. Like, Scooby-Doo jacket, Scooby-Doo shirts. There's one trip that we went on where I went as like a bunch of college kids, and my nickname for that trip became Scooby because that's all I wore was like Scooby-Doo t-shirts the entire time. Like the entire week was just a different Scooby-Doo t-shirt.
That's awesome.
You know, back in the 90s, you could get like Scooby-Doo shirts like anywhere. Like,
oh yeah,
popular, everything. I don't know. I don't think there's like not really a resurgence. There's new Scooby-Doo stuff out there, like Scooby-Doo cartoon, and then they have like the Scooby-Doo Apocalypse comic book. But not much Scooby-Dooing now. But you and another podcast host are doing a new podcast called I think it's, let me just make sure, it's Meddling Kids.
Yes, Meddling Kids Pod. We started that, I guess, roughly a month ago. And it's me and Julie Ken from the Station Wagon podcast, which is another great podcast if you want to go listen to it. And she called, or didn't call me. Well, she actually did call me. But initially she contacted me on Facebook and was like, would you be interested in doing this? Because I know that you had commented on a post about doing a Scooby-Doo podcast, and you sounded like you would be down. And I was like, I mean, yeah, I'm good for that. And so what the show is we every week break down in order an episode of Scooby-Doo, starting with episode 1 of Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? And, you know, God willing, if we're able to find every single thing, I mean, we're going to go through all the series, even the bad ones, even a pup named Scooby-Doo from the late 80s, early 90s, which I loved as a kid, but I realize is garbage. We're dreading when we get to the movies, but we're a long way from the movies. Mm-hmm. The live action movies, the 60s movies with like the Globetrotters and stuff were awesome. But we go through every week and we break down an episode of Scooby-Doo, and we have all sorts of theories. Like you said, I'm convinced that Fred may be the Zodiac killer. We have a weird theory that Velma might actually be Shaggy's mother, and maybe Shaggy is the love child of Fred and Velma. It's an interesting ride every week. I could say that for sure, but we've really enjoyed doing it, and it just gives me a chance to, you know, on Is This Adulting, I kind of keep the train on the tracks because my host and I are very similar in that we are super ADHD and hyper, and we like to be the one that makes the jokes. And so I try to be more hosty and keep it on the tracks and keep it moving segment to segment. Julie is sweet enough that she keeps me on the tracks in Meddling Kids and gives me the ability to just say the most asinine things about Scooby-Doo, and I love it. And it is, gosh, it's a load of fun.
It is. And, you know, for someone like, I grew up watching Scooby-Doo in the early 80s. And I remember, you know, like, no matter what time it was, you could always find Scooby-Doo. Whether it was like Scooby-Doo with Batman or Scooby-Doo and the Globetrotters, Scooby-Doo and, you know, whoever else happened to be on at the time, or just the Scooby-Doo episodes. It's like, dang, like I love some Scooby-Doo. And listening to the podcast and hearing things like the first episode when you're like, oh, they've got a museum, and it's like the county museum. It's like not even a named museum. It's just, you know, there it is. And they've got a lot of stuff for this like county museum. They have a working plane that happens to have gas in it. They have a giant T-Rex skeleton. And
right. I learned from that episode that all you have to do to fly a plane is flick a switch that says on. And then you're good. You're good to go. So I could be a pilot. I mean,
absolutely. Yeah, it's just like that show is just like, I didn't know I needed that show in my life, but now that the show is there, it just brings back so many like fun memories about my childhood and watching Scooby-Doo and like getting into it, and all the fun little theories and facts that everyone brings up. And I was trying to explain to my wife about the guy in the suit of armor, like, oh, he's got super strength, but he's like this really old guy and he's wearing a suit of armor. Like,
yeah,
how does that work? You think he
would be weaker, like it would be harder to lift things, but no, he's just. And how does he fit in the suit of armor? Because the guy who's in the suit of armor is clearly very overweight. and the suit of armor would not fit him. Because trust me, I've watched enough Game of Thrones to know, like, you need special armor if you're a larger person.
Yes, and you generally need someone to help you into that armor.
Well, apparently not on Scooby-Doo. He just, like, Santa Claus is into it and just, and then he's there.
Oh, man. And so, obviously, what you said, the goal was to do as much of what you guys can find, because as we progress into, like, this digital age, it seems like a lot of the stuff that I grew up on in the 80s, I can't find anymore. Even on, like, crappy YouTube, like, copies, it's hard to find some of the stuff that I grew up on as far as, like, old 80s cartoon shows.
Right. No, it's extremely difficult. I was lucky enough in college at a secondhand store to find the first 3 seasons of Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? The only 3 seasons of Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? From the 60s. And the 3rd season's considered lost episodes, quote unquote. But I found them for, like, $10 a pop, and so I bought them there. And so I have the actual, like, physical copies of them. But once we get past the original series, we're in no man's land. And she and I are going to have to figure out, because, like, they haven't released some of the cartoon movies originally because of some rights issues, and, like, I don't know how we're going to find it all, but it's going to be an adventure, and we're excited. I'm a little scared to see what happens once we get past the original series, but I think it's going to be a lot of fun, even though, good Lord, if you read the history of, like, when things aired and doing it by air date, I'm going to need, like, a cork board and strings to draw, like, between pictures to try to figure out, like, when we're going to record what episode, because it's so convoluted. Like, who knew the Scooby-Doo canon was so confusing?
Yeah, I was just thinking about a week or two ago, because I was on Facebook and I saw that they had, someone somewhere had, like, a Scooby-Dum Funko Pop. I was like, I have to have that, because Scooby-Dum is one of my favorite, like, cartoon characters ever.
It's amazing.
And then I'm thinking, like, oh man, like, I can't wait to hear about their thoughts about Scooby-Dum and just, like, that whole other side of, like, that whole, like, subsection of that family and everything.
I will say, I'll give you a little sneak peek. I do enjoy Scooby-Dum, but I'll tell you who I don't enjoy, and that's Scrappy-Doo.
No one likes Scrappy.
I've got harsh feelings towards Scrappy, so it's going to get a little heated whenever Scrappy appears.
But there's plenty of time there, because I don't think he doesn't appear in the main series, right?
No, he doesn't. No, he's not around until, I think,
creation.
the early 70s, and the main series was the late 60s. So I think I've got at least 2 more years of Scooby-Doo to get through before I have to deal with stupid Scrappy.
Who's your favorite character in the Scooby-Doo world?
In the whole world, or just of the gang? Because in the whole world, I'll be honest, it's probably Robin from the Batman and Robin crossover. That's my cop-out answer. But
in the Scooby-Doo verse
of the gang, I've got to say, probably my favorite is Shaggy, even though she asked me which one I identify with the most, and I was sad when I realized it's probably Scooby, because I'm large and furry, because I'm Greek, and, like, I'll do most anything for food. I get scared easily. Like, I was like, oh my God, I'm a complete Scooby. But I do enjoy Shaggy and his antics, even though as I've gotten older, I've just realized, oh, you're not funny. You're just high. Like, you're not a comedian. You're just really, there is literally a moment in the 2nd episode or 3rd episode where he comes above deck on a boat and goes, "You buzzed?" And I was like, whoa. Like, I think he meant, like, you rang, but I totally took it in a different way.
Yeah, it's that show. I mean, even just hearing, like, when you guys talk about it, it's like, man, like, as a kid, some of the stuff would have just, like, gone right over my head as, just gullibility right there.
Oh yeah, so much went over my head as a kid that I'm now just like, oh, I get it. I understand.
Now, for those who are listening and they want to either check out Facebook pages or websites or other social media, or how to find either of the podcasts, where can they find everything?
They can find it everywhere. This is the part where I'm sitting here going, okay, I'm still learning the Meddling Kids stuff, so I can go ahead and rattle off the Is This Adulting stuff. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/isthisadulting. The Facebook group is the Is This Adulting Best Friends, if you want to join that for discussion. We are on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, audible.com is where we're hosted. Not Audible, Audible's audiobooks. Audio Boom is where we're hosted. All these different platforms where you can find us, and we're on Twitter at @istthis_adulting. And then Meddling Kids, that's the question, isn't it? Oh, and Is This Adulting you can also find at isthisadultingpod.com. That's kind of the hub for everything. So I probably could have just sent you there, and then you could find everything from there, but I'm not smart enough to think of that fast, clearly, because I couldn't do the math of how long we've been doing the episodes. Meddling Kids, we are at, I believe, meddlingkidspod.com. We are Meddling Kids Pod on Twitter, facebook.com/meddlingkidspod, I believe. And we're on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, Libsyn, all those fun things.
Awesome. And for everyone that's listening, I'll have the notes and links on this podcast episode, as well as on the Facebook page and the website, so that way it's easily clickable. So you can find Stephen and his podcasts and check them out, because they are really good and you need to listen to them. And, they're great.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that.
Well, Stephen, thank you for taking the time out of your schedule, because you're a very busy person, to come on and talk to me about the things that you like.
No, thank you for having me. I've enjoyed this so much. I've had so much fun with this.
Well, I am glad. And now, eventually, in fact, I might even run out to the comic shop and see if they have any comics of the DC/Nightwing variety, which they probably don't, to be honest, unless they're in the long boxes in the back. But I'll have to go check, and if not, I'll have to just talk to them and be like, "Hey, can you get me something?"
Oh yeah, I was gonna say you gotta order some of those trades, that Chuck Dixon stuff. It is great.
Well, I will definitely do so. And again, Stephen, thank you so much. It was a blast.
Absolutely, thank you.
Thank you for listening to Tales from the Fandom. Subscribe to us on iTunes or your podcast app of choice. Follow us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/talesfromthefandom to see photos, links, leave feedback, and check out upcoming guests. If you'd like to be a guest, email David at talesfromthefandom@gmail.com.